So I'm Jeff Barker. I'm VP of Product Management, Product Marketing, VP of Product Marketing at Illusive, and I'm hosting today's session. We're going to have a lively discussion about zero trust, really focusing on the pragmatic challenges. Right, we read a lot about zero trust in the news. Right, when we read about it in an article, hey, you should do zero trust. It's really, it kind of comes across as easy. And we're going to chat through that, right? How do you get started? What are your challenges? Is it a journey or is it a destination? All of those things. So we'll talk about that. And in today's session, I'm joined by Wade Lance, Field CTO at Illusive, and Steve Turner, an analyst in covering security and risk for Forrester. So I'll give both of them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Wade?
Yeah, hello, it's Wade. Certainly a pleasure to be here today. I've been with Illusive for over 3 years now, but I've been in the security space for about over the last 12 years. And looking forward to the discussion today with my friend Steve, who's got a broad background in security and risk. So this should be entertaining at the least.
Thank you, Wade. Pleasure to be here, everyone. Steve Turner, an analyst here at Forrester, covering zero trust, ransomware, network security controls, and kind of you name it. And very much like Wade, I've been in the security field for over a decade, covering everything from infrastructure security, mobile security, and a whole bunch of other areas. And very excited for the discussion today.
Great, thanks, guys. So we're going to do this a little bit different. I know that oftentimes when a security provider like Illusive gets together with an industry analyst, we run through this process, right, where the analyst talks and then you see the vendor talk, and that same old formula. Think about this more as kind of zero trust unplugged, right? So we're going to have a discussion. We've got a few slides, but this is really all about kind of talking through the issues. And we'll talk about things like why is there an increased interest in zero trust, right? And how does least privilege fit in, and what does this road look like, and things like that. So we're going to talk through these issues. Got a couple slides just to kind of guide the conversation, but this is really all about this discussion. And from my perspective, really nothing's out of bounds. And so so let's have that discussion, and we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you've got questions, you've got comments, go ahead, drop them in the Q&A session, and we'll get to those at the end. So zero trust, I stole this from Steve. I loved it when we were doing our session the other day, a 12-year overnight success. We saw John introduce the notion of zero trust in 2009. Nobody argued with it. It's like, oh, that makes sense. But here we are, 2021, and now it seems to be all the rage, right? So, Steve, why don't you start with a little background, but to both of you, why now?
Yeah. So, the biggest thing to kind of highlight is back when John kind of came up with this idea of zero trust, it was using the technology of the time to be able to enable the principles and the different things that we talk about, when we talk about moving towards a zero trust strategy, things like least privilege, monitoring comprehensively, and, all of those ideas, were very difficult to implement at the time. We had to use, firewalls as segmentation gateways throughout folks' infrastructure to make those things happen. Very, very expensive if you're a large organization, or even you're a small organization, you probably don't have the budget to do those things. So now, over a decade later, we've got a multitude of different technologies that allow you to enable those principles at a much lower cost and much more comprehensively, because those things integrate with each other. And the biggest thing is that I think people have gotten tired of having their businesses taken down or interrupted by some of the very destructive attacks like ransomware, like some of these supply chain attacks that we've heard about. It was interesting because back when, like when Wade and I were talking about kind of this talk track, he had referenced, the whole NotPetya, attack, against a whole bunch of different, organizations. And you thought that maybe at that time we would have gotten it, right? That our way that we were approaching security didn't work, but now, between the SolarWinds attacks and the continuing other attacks that are going on out there, I think it's kind of demanded that folks change the way that they look at security.
Yeah, very interesting. Wade?
Yeah, great point, Steve. I like what you're talking about, the principles. Like, everybody agrees with the principles, right? It's like it's a no-brainer. And the technologies of the past, not really easy to work with, which made it hard. Obviously, the threat space is a driver, right? Attackers have very consistently shifted their process over to leverage these deficiencies that Zero Trust is trying to compensate for. And I think that security people, it's a hard job, right? Cybersecurity is a very hard job. We have to be right all the time, and attackers only have to find, one hole. And so I think thinking in terms of Zero Trust as a framework to help security teams take a long, hard look at their processes and structures and say, how do we level up against the current attacker method and start applying the framework to our thinking and to our planning and to our budgeting and into these processes. And I think that's why now is the combination of, better technologies, more sophisticated, more automated attack vectors make Zero Trust architecture and approach a real, godsend in a way, as a framework and a tool for organizations to kind of identify some of their deficiencies and where they can mature in ways that are meaningful beyond audit and compliance into actually defending ourselves against malicious operators.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned attack vectors. Is there, for both of you guys, is there a primary attack vector? Is there an attack vector that really triggered caused this tipping point towards Zero Trust?
So I'll be happy to weigh in kind of first here, but I don't think there was a particular attack vector that kind of, pushed this into the limelight. I think that, it just kept on so let's take ransomware as an example. Nobody's done anything about that all the way back from, again, I hate to keep referencing the NotPetya situation, but nobody's done anything to change the way that they're approaching security since then. So what did the bad guys do? Like Wade mentioned, they have all of these tools and all of this funding that they've gotten from those attacks to be able to prescriptively create tooling and automated methods to go and take down organizations across the globe. Right. And, we constantly hear folks kind of refer to this as, that they're targeting a specific sector, they're targeting a specific area. But the data and the research that we've done have found it's pretty even across sectors. They're looking for whatever cash cow is going to pay. And so that's who they're going after. And there's cash cows in every sector, right? There's folks within each of those sectors that, is going to be required to pay, either if they're providing critical services and they don't have a choice, or, they make some significant money that even if their business is down, it's going to cost them a lot more to not pay, than it is to pay. And so I think that, that's backed into some of the supply chain attacks that we saw with SolarWinds, where these folks were allowed to get more sophisticated because we didn't attack the problem, at the source, both building in foundational security to the way that we approach things, and, being able to cut off kind of that funding that's happening, for all of those different, adversaries out there.
Yeah, I would just make one comment there, Jeff, and that's that, there's two different kinds of attacks, right? Yeah. Oversimplification. There's the kind where, the malicious operator gets a system and we detect them and shut them down, and it's over. And those are unpleasant, but part of life. Then there's the kind of attack where the malicious operator gets one system and is able to move throughout the environment, and those are a giant problem. And that vector tends to go one of two ways, right? That lateral spread is either driven by network opportunity and unpatched vulnerabilities, right? And you've got a network problem and a patching problem, or it's more of a living off the land where I'm exploiting identities and using local tools. And those are the two common methods. So Zero Trust jumps in and says, well, we probably ought to manage that, right? We ought to probably look at segmentation and ways to control who can communicate where, so that there isn't, this giant flat environment making any exposed, vulnerability something that can be leveraged immediately for dramatic lateral movement. And we need to get a grip on identity, right? Because we know for a fact that if I can get a hold of the right identities in the organization and I can re-leverage privileged identities and credentials, that allows lateral movement, which is particularly pernicious, because if I use the local applications and I use local privileged identities to go where those systems go, how does a security team differentiate that from normal, right? And so I think that the consistency of that blast radius effect of what can an attacker do once they've gotten that beachhead really focuses us as security teams on the network problem and the segmentation problem, and then the identity problem and the management of privileged identities, and thus Zero Trust.
Right. Yeah, very, very true. Right. Let me go back and kind of keep rolling through this. So I kind of jumped ahead a little bit here, but I thought it was interesting. This is data that came from Forrester, right? And talked about the effects of breaches in the last 12 months, right? And certainly increased spending, added required two-factor authentication, which kind of maps to our identity challenge. And then the shift in identity in security strategies, which is interesting. And I think that kind of maps to what we're talking about today in Zero Trust. And then there's the big circle down at the bottom, which is, people have stolen stuff. I've lost money, I've lost data. There's real impact. And so let's kind of double click a little bit on that kind of identity piece as that threat vector. Are there things that people should focus on first on the identity front?
I mean, so that's a good question, right? The thing that I want to kind of like drive home that this data shows, right, is you don't have to take what the top thing that came out of what we saw people do when they get breached is. You don't need to go out and purchase new technology every time you're breached to say that that's going to solve the problem. I think that people need to be tactical in them, when we talk about that. So like some of the things that Wade had mentioned, if we can attack, things like privileged identities being available across an organization, like, Bob's endpoint shouldn't have, domain admin privileges just kind of ripe for the taking in order to laterally move throughout an organization. We should be taking away standing privilege across an organization and only allowing it to be checked out, when somebody needs to use it, and having that, those privileges be time boxed, so that if Bob, needs to use those privileges, but he doesn't use it within an hour or 2 hours or, set amount of time, should be taking away that stuff automatically. I mean, that's the whole idea that, is wrapped around the concepts of implementing Zero Trust, is automating, all of the routine activities so that we're not caught with our pants down.
Man, I love that point, Steve, in that Zero Trust is about automating the policies that we have, right? Building in those systems. And I think that's brilliant and right on. the nugget in that data for me, and I was glad to get to review that obviously prior to the session, was that 20%, one fifth of organizations are re-looking at their strategy, right? And my question is, what are the other 80% doing? Right? I mean, seriously, the caliber in the last year of organizations that have found their names in the press for major breaches that included compromise, initial compromise through whatever vector, and then movement throughout the environment and key data stolen, encrypted, up for sale, released, whatever. The caliber of those security organizations is some top tier, right? So my thought is, if you're not as a security organization and the board and the senior leadership taking a half a step back and saying, hey, let's drag out that 3-year plan, that 3-year security plan and our business plan, and let's re-examine this in the light of some of the things that we're seeing. I gotta ask, what are you doing? Because I can guarantee you that the organizations that are having serious public compromises, they're working their security plan, they're maturing and developing, they got a plan, they're executing on it. These are not second-rate security organizations. Yeah. What are the other 80% doing, Steve?
They're buying more tools. That's, it's you make like a really good point, Wade. I mean, for me, that was also something that kind of jumped out of the data, and I'm glad that you kind of bubbled it up, because if we're not changing the approach to the way that we're securing our organizations with the way that things are going, around the way that attackers are compromising organizations, it's concerning. It's concerning because we all, even here on the panel here, we all consume services from a lot of those organizations, and we rely on them to protect our data. So, at the end of the day, if we're not seeing this monumental shift, it's something to get worried about, and people should take that seriously. I mean, if the federal government is making a gigantic shift in the way that they want to approach security and mandating that across the board, maybe that's something that the private sector should be taking a look at as well.
Yeah, I guess last comment I'll make, Jeff, on this one is that, I talk to organizations all over the world, various times about their plan. And I think you have to ask yourself, look, if we're on the 5th generation of our endpoint security controls, right? Antivirus and next gen antivirus and EPP and then EDR. And so we're versioning away on better and better endpoint, which you should, nothing wrong with that, right? And then if we're on, whatever generation of firewalling and controls and what, we just keep iterating on the next version of the same kind of tools and stuff, but we're not actually maturing our overall strategy and our thinking. That's indicative of the value in what I think that, at 19% who are taking a half a step back and looking at their strategy, given successful results, and saying, hey, what are we doing here? Let's relook at that. Maybe I don't need to version forward to the next greatest SIM platform again. Maybe, okay, I got a SIM and it's basically functioning, working. Maybe I should look at some other elements of my strategy, like zero trust frameworks, and say, where could I leverage some of this?
Yeah. Yeah, very, very true. So we've kind of touched on this. There are some challenges. This is kind of the follow on to the previous slide. And I think you've both kind of touched on different parts of this. I think bring up some great points. So let's keep rolling. Let's get to the so how do we get there from here, right? And I'm kind of leading the witness a little bit, because I think you've both established thus far that, look, it's going to be a journey. So let's start with, let's assume it's a journey, right? This can't be an instant on. There's multiple moving parts to doing this. So what do you guys think? Where should people start?
I think that the best place for most folks to start, and again, this may just be leading the witnesses here, but the best place for most people to start would be from their identity posture. If we don't have a great, grapple on the way that we're maturing, the way that we approach identity, the rest of the security controls and the rest of kind of the security ecosystem that we look at as we build that zero trust architecture will fall over. Because if we don't have a grasp on, Bob has this role within my organization, therefore I'm going to define that he should have access to X, Y, and Z because of his role and because of where he is within the organization. How can we build meaningful security policy in the rest of that zero trust architecture? That being said, things again like privileged identities should be managed across the board, and that even can go down to a granular level when we're talking about local administrators on endpoints, because again, that is one of our first defenses that we have against allowing adversaries to peel back our security onions to understand what we're using to defend ourselves and use that against us. So I think for a lot of organizations, when they think identity, they think of things like multi-factor authentication. They think about all the things that make every top 10 list that everybody reads in a blog post or some recommendation thing out there. But they don't think all the way down, that, path of the granular stuff around governance and understanding what, those role profiles look like within the organization and what business processes tie hand in hand with that to be able to onboard, identities when necessary, but offboard those identities, when it's really demanded. I mean, look at the Colonial Pipeline attack. That's a perfect example of somebody utilizing an identity that was just sitting there that should have been terminated a long time ago and didn't have, a requirement from a policy perspective of having multi-factor authentication on it as well.
Yeah, I think I think Steve crushed it right. If you don't have a grip on identity, it's game over. And I think that when I look at security organizations and talk to them about their systems and plans, integrations, and all that, I generally see heavy movement towards privileged identity management, right? And they should. Two-factor, absolutely. Vaulting of privileged users and groups, absolutely. But there's two major issues around identity management that I see fairly consistently out there. Number one, it's this issue of siloing, right? It's like, okay, so I've got privileged identity management. I'm in good shape because I've got a PAM solution. I've hooked it with Active Directory and we're managing privileged groups. So my domain admin creds are all under control and I'm auditing them and that's all, buttoned up and wired tight. We've got two-factor applied to all that, and so and here's that dangerous, so yeah, we're doing that and we're good, right? So the issue is the one that Steve was referencing. It's like, well, that's not the only identity stack, right? We come in audit environments and find, local Windows administrator accounts, not Active Directory, local Windows admin that's pervasive throughout the environment and not being managed and all sharing a password, and security teams are unaware of it. And an attacker compromises one of those systems and recognizes, oh gosh, look, here's a local Windows admin. Password hasn't changed in 40 years. Logged in yesterday. I'll use that. Now I'm local admin. I wonder if that same local admin account works on my neighbor. Oh, look, it works there too. And so now this attacker is God mode across these systems, completely ignoring Active Directory, by the way. It's simply sidestepping that and using another form of identity, right? And so when we add on to that the explosion of identity types, right? There's what's happening in the cloud. There's not just Active Directory. There's Azure Active Directory and local Windows. There's these third-party SaaS applications, and you start stacking up all these silos of identity. and saying to the security team, by the way, you need to manage all of those. You need to have an understanding of all of those and what the outliers are, where the privilege cred's not being managed, what are you doing about service accounts, and on and on and on. That's when we kind of realized the extent of the problem is that Zero Trust is built on good identity management and having good visibility and awareness of all the different facets of identity. That's not something that organizations that I typically see have really developed or matured into.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It makes me think about kind of it always seems like we're as security teams and myself way back in the day, being a security professional, we're always responding to what the auditor wants, right? Is there an opportunity to get out in front and lead here and be able to present to the auditor, hey, here's the situation of the identities accessible on my systems, and this is what we really need, right? I've checked these 19 things that I look for to ensure the integrity of my identities, and we're good. Should we be out in front leading in that area?
I think that the thing with Zero Trust, and specifically Zero Trust architecture, is that it is supposed to be a proactive security approach compared to the way we've been doing things in the past. I've seen a lot of organizations, worked in a lot of organizations that audit and risk has driven kind of the maturity of certain parts of the security program. And I don't think that that's probably the appropriate approach. While that's great for checking and balancing, what you're actually doing, I think we need to get out ahead of that. And I think so, taking that Zero Trust approach to things proactively addresses, all of those requirements that you're trying to meet. So again, we talk about the principle of comprehensive visibility or comprehensive security monitoring. Having those insights, especially the stuff that Wade was referencing there, because I've been right there, with the security team where they're it's hey, SOC, are you monitoring anything that's going on within Azure AD and all of the local credentials that actually sit within that store compared to where you're actually looking for all of the threats kind of going on? And it's just kind of eye-opening, right? It's just it totally blew their minds. They're wait, you can have local identities in all of these different places, and we should be monitoring for something totally different over there. So I think that, as organizations move more towards that Zero Trust approach, having that visibility and having that understanding of everything under, that technology purview, because this is not just all about security, right? It's right. About, all of the different IT and business technology stacks that we're bringing into this discussion to inform what we're building around that Zero Trust architecture, taking into account business processes and knowing what to monitor for there and knowing what's important. Those are the things that drive that discussion. And those are the things that drive you to be several steps ahead of those audit and risk questions that you ultimately get.
So just one quick comment on what Steve said is, thinking about this as a business problem, right? And thinking in terms of how does a approach to least privilege and Zero Trust and an active defense really put us in a position to do business, right? And put us as a business, put us in a position to take advantage of new technologies and new solutions and new ways to interact with new customers and new methods, because we can do that with confidence because we know that we're managing the identities relative to those interactions, right? And if it's a siloed kind of, yep, I got my cloud identities and I'm managing all those and so I'm good, and then somebody else over here is doing Active Directory and someone over there is doing Azure Active Directory and someone over there is doing local Windows administrators, you got database applications, you got the DevOps people running cloud resources and checking in out code and all that, and somebody else is doing vendor management, security and whatnot. And if all those pieces are siloed, I can almost guarantee you that there are blind spots that can be leveraged. Attackers will find them. And as security organizations, if we have visibility and monitoring of those and controls in place, and we're working to manage that identity posture, then our organization is in a position to aggressively pursue new technologies and new markets and new places, because we can kind of do it with confidence. If we're chasing unfortunately, what has happened is that the consequences of breach have become so dramatic that a lot of organizations that struggle in this space just get crushed. I heard just earlier this week, an organization, a business in Europe, their cyber risk insurance premiums went up 100% this year based on findings from the auditors tied specifically to unmanaged privilege identity space, right? And saying, wow, if we're going to have to insure you with that way, that 100% growth in your insurance premium, that's opportunity lost for the business, because that's capital that can't be applied to doing business. It's a real expense.
Super good point. Yeah, so let's keep moving. I want to jump to, because we're starting to actually talk a little bit about the challenges, right? And kind of what we need to do. So is there, if we think about zero trust, right? And we've established it's a journey. I think we've established that, boy, if you don't start with your identities and get your arms around identities, it's going to be a long journey for you to get to zero trust. You're probably just not going to get there. You made a wrong turn along the way. Is there a capability that you guys think is most out of reach, for organization? What's going to be the biggest challenge?
I honestly think that there's certain capabilities that organizations think are out of reach, but in reality, because of the way that things have matured from a technology and capability perspective, they're not as out of reach as people are expecting. One of those things that I heard Wade kind of call out earlier was, let's just talk about the gigantic topic of network segmentation and all of the tech that's underneath that. Like when we start to go down in the weeds around things like microsegmentation, we found through some of our research that, it's in some of the single digit to barely crawling into the double digit percentages of organizations that are implementing that. And I believe that people are afraid of the sins of the past that have happened around network segmentation and microsegmentation, where they thought that they had to be laser perfect in order to implement that technology. But we find things like microsegmentation and network segmentation, prevent exactly what Wade was talking about earlier around this lateral movement problem. But, that what goes hand in hand with that is having a mature identity posture to be able to pair with that, because a lot of the policies that you design, especially when we talk about microsegmentation, are heavily identity based. So I'd argue that microsegmentation is one of those things that organizations think, this is way too hard, I'm not going to approach this. Like, we have to do all these other things first. Like, Wade was joking about all the next gen tech, like that we can just evolve or iterate on fairly quickly. They see that as the easy problem to solve. And in a lot of cases, they are the easy problems to solve. But I really think that folks have to stop seeing microsegmentation and network segmentation as this gigantic boogeyman that's going to be really, really hard to solve. And, they have to be perfect. And if they fail, then it's just going to be egg on everybody's faces. I'd argue that that's one of the biggest challenges, paired with the whole classification and protection of data across organizations. I think that's another thing that people have approached in the past with the technologies they had available, and they failed on that front. And they're like, well, we can't go back to that. Zero Trust is saying that I have to do that across my entire organization and recognize all of my critical data stores and where all of that's being stored. Holy crap. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not going to be able to do that. And then now you're telling me to do microsegmentation and network segmentation? This Zero Trust stuff is baloney. Like, forget it. Like, it's not even worth it. So that's what I hear from a lot of like practitioners and organizations.
Yeah. the pain there, I think, just agreeing with all that Steve has just said, and yet another layer is, we think about segmentation, enterprise spaces. Thankfully, cloud structures kind of start off in a more, deny all, but only allow whatever connections we enable. So that's going to help start building that way, right? As we go forward. And I think there's a lot of benefits in that motion to SaaS and cloud-based structures, because it gets us out of legacy enterprise spaces, or at least continuing to build legacy enterprise spaces where you start off with an allow all, whatever we deny, and it just puts us backwards. I think the pain there has been the shift in the last 12 to 18 months to remote yet managed hosts, right? Work from home means, everyone picked up their system and went home. So, the segmentation and the enterprise spaces and all that kind of stuff, I think this is another thing I'm hearing is someone's like, wait a minute, I'm focusing on re-architecting all my enterprise architectures and my data center structures for being highly segmented. And brother, everybody left. Obviously the hosts are all still in the data center, right? And how does this help me in my SaaS application environments, right? Where I don't own any of that. The segment is the internet, And so I think this drags us back around to, we need to do all of the segmentation in the enterprise spaces we possibly can. We need to only build new architectures that are segmented from the get-go. We need to implement micro-segmentation at the application level to make sure that those structures are tight from the ground up when applications and database interactions and front ends are all architected. Absolutely. But the reality is that the constant beyond all of that is identity, right? And if you don't have control over identity, none of that's going to matter, because I'm simply, as an attacker, going to ride the connectivity I'm allowed based on stealing somebody else's privileged identity and leveraging that, because your segmented environment allows that privileged user to traverse those VLANs, right? That's the point. So I feel the pain of the operators who are looking at segmentation and micro-segmentation and the big shift to work from home and kind of the wild west of networking. I get that. Which is why kind of this focus that we're having in the session today on identity being a major driver is because it's a safe haven that is not going away for security teams that want to build meaningful security in these new diverse environments. And if they focus on identity, that is not wasted work.
Right. Yeah, totally. So let's move in the last few minutes to the speed round. So, there's a lot of buzzwords. There's a lot of topics around zero trust. And so I'm going to run through each of these, and I'm just going to give you guys, just give me your quick thoughts, 10 seconds of thoughts on each of these things. So we'll go ahead and maybe start with Steve. Multi-factor authentication.
Must do. If you don't have it today, you're behind.
Wade?
Yeah, absolutely. Must do, but don't believe it's not a silver bullet, right? That's not going to solve your identity problems. It's certainly going to make them worse if you don't have it.
Yeah. Identities. Steve?
I think that the biggest thing that I just, put in here is that, if you're not looking to pull in, whatever relevant attributes to evaluate each transaction that happens around identities, you should definitely do that right away.
Yeah, I think auditing, I love that that's plural, right? It's not identity, it's identities, and getting after all of the different buckets of identity that we have and starting to look holistically at identities and get out of this siloed perspective on identities, critical.
Yeah. Lateral movement.
All that kind of evokes is, do privilege management, make sure that you're monitoring across your identities, across all infrastructures to be able to detect when that's happening. That doesn't just apply to on-prem AD.
Yeah, lateral, malicious lateral movement's the killer, right? This is an area, that MITRE attack, phase, 4, 5, 6 through 9, that central portion, using advanced capabilities to do detection and differentiation in that space it's essential, to stopping the, being on the front page of some press rag or another.
Yeah. Yeah. Microsegmentation.
Not impossible. You should give it another go if you've failed in the past. The technology has come a long way, and it's critical for you understanding what applications are doing what and what those relationships look like with your identities within your organization.
Yeah, under microseg, it's don't build anything. Please stop building application structures that are not microsegmented. Okay, if you don't want to deal with your legacy apps, I get it, but don't build any more that aren't microsegmented. Come on.
Yeah. Cyber hygiene.
Grown. I don't know, but I'm joking. When I hear cyber hygiene, the biggest thing that I can emphasize for folks is to take a look at your security fundamentals. Zero trust doesn't replace security fundamentals, but it should give you a lot of different areas for you to look at, how am I approaching identity, network, devices, data, all of the different facets that you've been required to secure in the past. Go back to those things, because if you're not solid there and you're building on a foundation of sand, it's all going to topple over.
Yeah, cyber hygiene. Look, security organizations need to audit their posture with newer tools that look across the silos of identity configuration and find the misconfigured, the overprivileged, the exploitable identities, the persistent privileged identities, the edge identities that are not being managed for whatever reason. Maybe they can't be, right? And we need to audit those as just a basic part of cyber hygiene, because the attackers can do this. Attackers do this. They have automation that allows them to audit the effectiveness of those platforms. There's a raft of tools from Cobalt Strike and Bloodhound, Sharphound there's 85 different tools. Hey, Windows comes with tools. DS query works great, right? And so attackers can audit your cyber hygiene and identity management very effectively. And we need to start doing this as just a basic, it's just now table stakes to look across identity and get better at cyber hygiene, because that's where attackers are putting it to us. They know more about our unmanaged identities than we do.
Yeah, awesome. I sense some passion around hygiene there. That's awesome. Active defense.
Again, zero trust is all about being proactive. So anything that you can set off those alarms appropriately within your organization when somebody is doing like some of the things that Wade mentioned, because you should be using those same tools for your defensive posture. Anything that you can do in that boat, is something I totally recommend.
Yeah, we need to, security organizations need to move to a proactive, or an active defense. And get ahead of this. There's a way in which some of that cyber hygiene is an active defense. It's proactive. Get out there and audit your position and understand what the opportunities are to leverage exploitable and privileged identities in your environment and reduce that attack surface. That's getting proactive. But I think there's also a way to use, MITRE talks about it in their shield structure. Ways to leverage deception as a method, because we know attackers are going to use this method and use identities. Let's give them some deceptive identities and get clarity of detections and push the burden back on the attacker to kind of see through the identity noise. And an active defense absolutely makes the difference in today's environment, where we have to assume that the attacker is going to get beachheads. attacker's going to get beachheads. We have to assume it. Yeah.
Biggest misconception.
Zero trust is not a big bang. You don't have to go and deploy it like a traditional IT or security project. You can do it in bits and pieces and take the existing capabilities and elements that you've already put within your organization and start there. Tie those things together. EDR, SIMs, SOARs, all of that stuff plays a part in being able to help you achieve, that zero trust architecture that you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on, right? Thinking about this incrementally, right? Where can we take the zero trust framework and look at our state today and say, where does zero trust architecture teach us to start versioning our capabilities that are really behind, right? And as per the theme of the session today around, kind of an identity focus, you can get a lot of bang for the buck by doing a better job with identity, using zero trust as the model for you don't have to get it all, right? It's not an all or nothing. There's little bits that make a lot of progress.
Yeah. I know kind of we're all on the tech side, zero trust, right? But is business or technology issue or both? It
should be both. If you're not approaching it from that angle of both, then you're doing it wrong. And it won't, things like microsegmentation, you will fail again if you failed in the past, if you approach that purely from a technology standpoint. The biggest thing that I can emphasize, and I know we talked about capabilities earlier, is, when you're putting together a team internally to deploy, whatever that zero trust or design that zero trust architecture or strategy, make sure that you're bringing in business leaders or having them nominate folks within those different business functions to participate in those discussions and inform that design.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I love the stories of the security team that was like, hey, we're gonna version our security for this application or for this identity structure or whatever. And you know what, this time, let's go get somebody from the business side and drag them into these conversations and talk about what we're doing. The security side is a technologist. We all complain when the business goes out there and implements something and then asks us to secure it. But then we go drop security on top of them, without any, conversation with them to a great degree. And it's been fun to be a part of some of those conversations when the business people are a part of them and they start raising these, well, wait a minute. If we do that, how are we gonna, and everyone looks back and goes, oh yeah, that is kind of important, so ton of value in what Steve was talking about. Bring the business people in or you're not going to be successful.
Yeah. Awesome. So that's that's our speed round. Go ahead, if you're in the audience and you've got questions, drop them in the Q&A session, and we can go ahead and answer them on the call. But there have been a couple that have kind of come in and I want to talk about them. One is lateral movement. So when I get zero trust, lateral movement not an issue anymore. I'm paraphrasing a little bit for the question, but that was kind of the essence of it.
Yeah, so I'm gonna extend what Wade mentioned earlier, because I think it applies to zero trust as well, like more holistically, is that zero trust is not a silver bullet. So, while zero trust was designed to address lateral movement and address, all of these attacks that we've seen over time and take this default deny approach to things, you should still be using some of the tooling that Wade mentioned to map your attack paths within your organization and close out those things as you iterate on that zero trust architecture that you built out.
Yeah, I think, look, there's no silver bullets for any of this, right? But what we're trying to do is make it harder for attackers to find 85 different ways to move laterally. If we could reduce it down to just a few and only from certain locations, we'd be in a way better posture. And I think that's a point of concern for organizations, we see this in the pen tests and the red teaming exercises and the whatnot, is that most organizations, there are lots and lots and lots of ways to move laterally with a lot of privilege. And we're just making it too easy. So the zero trust architectures get us pointed in the right direction around reducing the number of times that can happen and the places where it can happen. That's I don't have to be faster than Jeff to outrun the tiger, or I don't have to be faster than the tiger, right? I just have to be faster than Jeff. And sometimes that's good enough,
Yeah. Good points. Another interesting question, right? And looking for some tips, right? Identity is typically, in this case, shared, that's managed by the ops team. So I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, because managed by the ops team, but you guys are talking about identity as security. Any tips on how to navigate that?
I think that if your security team and your ops teams don't have a good relationship, or don't have some sort of cross collaboration, whether this is, it could be a weekly meeting, it could be a standing meeting, with at least some key folks to adjust those detections, adjust, some of the things that maybe the security team seeing configured from a operational point of view, that, because, security is all about finding those operational deficiencies, right? Because they think that it's an attacker coming in, when in actuality, something is misconfigured, or something can be approved upon. So I think that if your security team doesn't have a good relationship with your identity operations team, or even the identity engineering and architecture teams, it's worth a look right now. And it's worth considering and trying to build that relationship. And that should extend out from not just the identity team, but to those networking teams. A lot of those other traditional IT functions that maybe security didn't have input into, or didn't have visibility or insight into. So I'd highly recommend standing up some sort of ongoing meeting, even if you're starting it once a month, even though I think that's way too long, to bring up issues like that. I'd recommend getting that going within your organization.
So yes, and security needs to stop pilfering all the best people out of IT, right? So that's what happens. We set up these weekly meetings, right, with the most security savvy people in the Active Directory group, and then 3 months in, we pilfer that person as a part of our security team, and for some reason, then we're all surprised when the IT operational people, they don't want their people to meet with us, So, okay, maybe that's a little tongue in cheek, but yeah, I think investing in the training of some of the IT people through the kind of meetings, Steve was talking about, I agree, once a month is woefully inefficient. Probably needs to be more like once a week, where we look at the issues and where we at in resolving these issues, right? We've identified these shadow administrators. These users in Active Directory are shadow administrators. They're highly privileged. They're not a part of managed privilege groups. What are we going to do about that? This is the third week in a row we've brought this up. Where are we at in investigating why these users need these rights, and walking through that process? And look, as a security organization, we're going to have to do some training and some hand-holding with some of the IT people, so that they understand the risk associated with these IT people, because the IT people are all about making it work, making it go, keeping the business rolling. And we're like, oh, no, we want you to turn off all those permissions. Don't let those users touch that stuff. They're gonna break things, So working on training with those people is an essential element, so that they kind of understand why this is important for the organization. And don't always pilfer them. Come on.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, hey, we're just a couple minutes from the top of the hour. I've enjoyed the discussion. I think we've hit on some real key issues. Hopefully, we've given all of you guys in the audience some things to think about, some places to start. Identity is that keystone, I think, is the conclusion from our discussion, and let's get our arms around those, and that's where we have to start. So appreciate everybody's time today, and we'll call it a wrap now. We'll be doing some follow-up with everybody, send you a copy of the recorded session, and you can share it amongst colleagues. And so, and if you have any questions or comments, you'll get the contact information as part of the follow-up. Love to hear from you. So thanks, you guys. Steve, Wade, it's been a pleasure. Had a great time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks all.